Let's begin with 3 deep breaths. Taking a deep breath in and exhaling. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale and hold. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale all the way. What prevents us? What binds us? What holds us back from navigating the furthest and deepest spaces of ourselves freely? What tools can we use? What instruments can we play? What do we seek that can clear the obstructions, that can open the doors of experience within ourselves that are already there and in truth have always been there? To be unaware is to work against yourself, to live in the unknown. This is the illusion of self-bondage. In yoga, we call the granthis. The granthis are an embodiment of all collective experience and knowledge from past lives, this life, and the next. Imaginary knots made by time, the yogic anatomy of teachings and sutras that contract and tighten our minds and bodies and ultimately ourselves. To be entangled is to be enslaved. The granthis are our relationship to everything and everyone, the ancestral bloodlines and self-incarnations that weave philosophical complexities by tying knots through our chakras, blocking the possibility of potential. Like the great Gordian knot, the granthis are meant to be pierced by the sword of yoga, the backbone that wields the spirit of the spine through the power and peace of the practitioner to free themselves of themselves. These 3 metaphysical knots, Brahma, Vishnu, and Ruda, affect our hips, heart, and head respectively. And like the great Gordian knot, only a radical consciousness can solve this unsolvable riddle that the granthis contain. That in which a word unsheaths itself, a chakra releases itself, that which we call the self. To master the self is to master the spine, a vision that reveals the sword-like mastery within ourselves to sever the granthis bind. The symbol of the spine as the sword is the inner to outer extension of our practice to loosen and lighten the granthis' many knots. In yoga, the spine sword shows us how to visualize our movements from the tip of the blade down to the hilt, wielding the breath from the crown to the tailbone. The mastery of the sword's movements is the same as the mastery of our spines. Forward, backward, side to side, and twisting, which all leads to the liberation and perfection of the 7th movement, the elongation of perfect posture that liberates the granthis completely. A true yogi always leads with their heart, and like the blade of the sword, the heart, the thoracic spine, is the strongest at cutting through the veils that mask the mysteries of illusion and separation. What transforms the sword into the yogi, the warrior into the mystic, who fights not from themselves, but for the self, is the position of their sword. For the warrior, the sword is in front. For the mystic, the sword is within. The sword symbolizes our strength and flexibility, forged by fire, settled by breath, and quenched by the still waters of our practice. What does it take to straighten up for ourselves? and then to stand for something more than ourselves, to ultimately take us beyond ourselves. If we extend our practice a little more, from 5 minutes to an hour, from an hour to 3 hours, from a half a day to a day, from a night into a morning, from months into years, from years into a lifetime, and from a lifetime into a perfect moment, no matter what the length of time, we see in the eyes of another the I we both share. To practice intention is the remembrance of accountability to ourselves. Intention supports right actions, as it is the intention of the practitioner that makes the action right. What is right may not be right for anything or anyone else, for right action is in the pursuit of self-interest, free of selfishness. The need to hold on or the wanting to let go are all little battles that we face from both sides of ourselves warring for peace. The freedom is found in knowing how we battle our battles, and so to know what our intention is and to do it without hesitation is the nature of all right action, the revolution of revelation. So don't be afraid to sing the song of something sacred, to be worthy and deserving to practice the essence of true power and know real peace. Morph and transform the spine into the sword. Release it from the stone that holds your back and holds you back. Learn to listen to the snake, not the snake charmer. Learn to listen to the crane, not the winds of change. Learn to listen and listen and listen until you hear the intelligence of the earth beneath your feet. Feel the power of the sky behind closed eyes. To see the Om in every asana, the cosmic vision that is the practice, that is the teaching, that is yoga. Let us never break posture to get into posture. Let us use the power of perfect posture to safely cut away any harm we have done to ourselves. Let us take a gentle journey through the forgotten teachings, that to practice something as elegant and beautiful as perfect posture, it doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be fixed. Rather, just allowing and accepting the artistry of alignment to naturally unfold. A remembrance of how we all began and how we can begin again. Elongate the spine, expand the breath, and open the heart. Movement is medicine for the body. Stillness is medicine for the mind. To know the journey of yoga, we must first come to understand our own study and practice of what yoga is and what yoga is not. Through the traditions and teachings of great masters and living exemplars, the consciousness of yoga is a direct transmission of the inner experience and the knowledge that evolves from the daily practice of that experience. Yoga cannot be gifted to us as students without first making the necessary space within ourselves to have this experience for ourselves. Whether we realize this or not, by giving ourselves this permission, we can receive the teacher's invitation to reciprocate their own experience, seeing through another's eyes our own eye. This reciprocation of direct, shared experience between the teacher and the student is what we call in yoga Darshan. Why Darshan is so important is because it transforms the student into the teaching, not the teacher. For the grace of the true teacher is to hold the space for each student, lead by example, and share what is most beautiful in themselves. And so the consciousness and conscientiousness of showing up for others first begins by showing up for ourselves. Yoga is a way to help lift the veils of our individual illusion, a vision which shows us a way out of our own way, aspiring the liberation of I, me, my, to realize what we call the self in all that we see, are, and practice to be. A rishi is an ancient Sanskrit name for one who sees. And what did they see? They saw the union of all things as one. This consciousness was embodied as a practice, that which we call yoga. This communion transformed the rishi into the very union of what they saw. One who sees not from the senses, but from the heart. It's in the coming of age that the new age will come. To reach the heart is to summit the mountain of all teachings. The yoga from 1,000 years ago is the same yoga today and will be the same 10,000 years from now. To experience this wisdom of the past through the present is the much needed spiritual maturing for this journey. It is far greater to imagine what is than what is not. What is true cannot be separated from what is real. The present moment is the only moment through the practice of this teaching. The yoga is the teaching. The yoga is the practice. And so the yoga in yoga is the timeless experience of consciousness teaching how to practice. In the beginning, we study yin as yoga, the slow, the deep, the dark, the lunar, the feminine aspects of ourselves. The consciousness of yin is the power of an uncreated light that reveals our concealed nature held within the experience of surrender. The tha in hatha yoga is the embodiment of this surrender, and the ha is the awareness of the experience. The Shiva, that is the Shakti, the moonlight, that is the sun, the yang, that is always watching the yin unfold. Energy always follows awareness. In holding any of the hatha yoga postures, we are held and be held. For everything that is grounded grows, and everything that grows gives, and everything that gives must surrender. To know the rising of ha into tha is to experience a silence that is anything but silent, and a stillness that is anything but still. The weaving of being alive to our living and awake to our waking. To master the experience of yoga is a relationship between the practice and the teaching, a sacred union of mind and body through breath. This communion can never be realized without first knowing the self, the royal phenomena, the who I was, who I am, and who I will be, of all past and future cornations of I into a self without I. Through yoga, we practice answering the question, who am I? Not with an answer, but with the realization of who is asking the question. It is not a matter of who am I, but rather the awakeness of the awareness behind each question, the awakening of the questioner, the I in all that we see. Yoga is concerned with the power behind the I am, the understanding and acceptance of the seeker as the answer. Yoga is not something we do, it is something we are. As we continue to experience the power of the presence behind the I am, through the practice of yoga, there is nothing. This no thing is but an experience of ourselves emptied of our own story and storytelling. So what we call yoga is not a story. It is an entirety of experience characterized in a single word to describe the indescribable knowledge of non-separation. The great masters of the past experienced the very same present moment as we are experiencing now. For yoga is the changeless change throughout all time. This is the experience taught by the great teachers and masters of their time. The untold story, fearlessly freeing the storyteller from their own fables. Awake to the height of this high place, a single thought is all that can separate us from everything else. So what we call the heart is an experience beyond thought, an experience beyond separation, for there is no thinker when the mind disappears, only the self that is everything else. The love for yoga is not the same as the yoga of love, for yoga is the union, Love is the communion, the yoking of any two in oneness. Yoga gives us the permission to love and be loved, first to love and awaken ourselves with all our strength, all our heart, all our mind, and all our soul. And then to be awake to the love of another. The heart of yoga is tethered to the heart of each and every practitioner. And at the heart of each and every practitioner is the teaching of love, awaiting to awaken to the practice of love. We must first learn how to teach by teaching and how to practice by practicing. And that is why we must learn how to love by loving. There is no substitute or alternative for the direct shared experience of practice, the communion of union in teaching the consciousness of yoga. In loving ourselves, we are awake to wherever we are, because everything that has led to this moment and everything that lies beyond this moment is meant for us to understand that there is only this moment. When we experience our own awakeness, we see that we are loved, we are loving, and we are love. The presence of a perfect moment, what we call in yoga samadhi, the complete absorption of 1 + 1 in oneness. The consciousness of yoga is the practice of love and awakenedness. When the mind becomes love, yoga is achieved. The student becomes the teacher. When the mind becomes awakened, yoga is achieved. The seeker becomes sought. There is no opposite to love and awakenedness, for it is a state of true union. It is simply the lack of love, the absence of awakenedness, that creates the illusion of separation and is the cause of all suffering. So forgive all that cannot be forgotten, and unlearn all that you have learned. Remember, everything stands in our way. Every thought, feeling, and attachment separates us from everything else. When we do not live in the moment of everything I need is here, then we live in the world of not enough. This is the immovable obstacle of mind that must be overcome, the practice of every moment, the consciousness of yoga. Yoga is both preemptive and prescriptive to suffering, and all suffering is caused by separation, which comes from the mind. All of our suffering is a state of separation, a mental impediment of mind. So what is the mind, and why does it cause suffering through separation? What we call the mind is made up of 3 parts. The first is our senses, the second, the sensorium of our senses, and the third is our sense of self. The brain is the organ that processes the sensory information of the senses, but it is the mind that attaches a narrative to this information. When the mind is active, the mind is in a sense of self, an intelligent I to every other mind it encounters. The sense of self is a thing that our mind as a storyteller has created for ourselves to understand the relationship of the world within and around us. Each thing we experience, everything we learn, is but a story we tell ourselves. And so what we call suffering through the awareness of our practice is the mind reacting to the undesired outcome of its attachment, the unfavorable result of not getting what we want. Suffering is the reactive state of separation between desired and undesired outcome. It is the storyteller not realizing the relationship between the story and their own storytelling. What you think, you become. What you believe, you embody. When pointing to the source of thought and belief, there is always a story. And behind every story, there is a storyteller. That is the power and folly of mind. To be free from the propriety of the storyteller must be devoid of any sense of I. This can only be achieved through meditation, because meditation is the storyless story, the samadhi of mind experiencing no mind. Meditation redresses the stories of our lives, the genres of ourselves. One moment a comedy, the next a tragedy, identifying that which self-identifies, the ego, as the great conglomerate of narratives. Any mind devoid of these narratives is what we call the self. Through the awareness of each inhalation and exhalation, The breath moves freely between the outer and inner worlds of our chosen narratives, and a storyless story can flow from within, a remembrance of who we most truly are. I want to be happy. Let go of the wanting, learn to identify the I, and just be happy. The liberation of mind from the illusion of separation and suffering is the storyless story of our practice. When we meditate, we free ourselves from our attached states because the mind becomes awakened to the delusion of its own illusion, being attached to what we think we are. Separation between any two things only exists in the mind. This includes any and all relationships between subject and object, content and context, percept and concept. Much like with deep sleep and orgasm, the mind dissolves into the moment of its own experience, back into its natural essence. The mind beheld within the yoga posture increases our awareness of the self, ultimately beholding what we call being. So we are accepting and allowing that part of ourselves, that which is our essential essence, in being formless within the form. We are human beings. So what are we doing while we are in the posture? Struggling. What are we struggling with? Our being human. When we can enter a state of being in the struggle, being in the posture, being ourselves, that is what is most important. First, the acceptance of our being, then the acceptance of the struggle. Self-interest keeps us from remembering this. Self-interest is a state of separation. It is of mind. It is human, and so it can be forgiven. It can be shown gratitude through the awakening of love. It is part of the growing pain. It is part of the struggle. When we struggle together. But when we suffer alone. Meditation is a state of remembrance that strengthens our connection to ourselves. It is a process of transitioning from outer to inner world, a practice of accepting what is rather than what could or should be. Meditation is not something we do, it is something we are. It is the liberation of our being, freed from the human element of mind, which separates us from everything else. Commonly misunderstood as pragmatic or self-serving, meditation is a practice which serves the self, so that we may authentically master all that we are capable of. One can never truly express what meditation is, for the experiencer is free from the experience. It is an experiment of science that requires the scientist to be studied. Empiricism through observation of the present moment without the presence of an observer to influence or witness what is being observed. No mind, no problem. When we come to understand the experience of no mind most deeply through the practice of meditation, we simultaneously experience no problem. For how can a problem exist without mind? Because it is the mind that creates the problem, ourselves, the captive, captivated by our own story and storytelling, imprisoned and entertained by the very problem that is mind. There is no seeking when the seeker becomes sought. The suffering we experience is in the pursuit itself, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of worthiness, the pursuit of love. The grand illusion is that we have to pursue in order to obtain. The transcendental qualities of our freedom exist prior to their pursuit, a journey without destination. There is nothing as sacred as here, nowhere more special than now. We can be at the top of the Himalayas, we can be at the depths of the Amazon. If we are meditating, then we are meditating. It makes no difference where we are, it makes no difference who we are with. Everywhere is here, and now is always. Both are eternal. A gentle reminder that while traveling, the true loci is in the lotus of the heart. The deeper we dig, the higher we fly. The end unearths the beginning. Radical consciousness is taught by the warmth of a warrior's light. When we practice yoga, we practice controlling ourselves through the awareness of the breath. To say namaste is to acknowledge the power of that breath with a breath, the source of I am to another who is, the consciousness of the heart expanded to another, seeing the invisible as indivisible, the paradox of non-separation within all that appears to be separate. We do not plant the tree for the pleasure of the fruit. We plant the tree for the sake of the seed. The origin of this emergent consciousness dates back to the Bhagavad Gita, the essential ancient text of yoga. It is so important to understand the Gita, as it is the prerequisite to unlock the very nature of the consciousness. The Gita is the poem that leads us from volition to surrender of a great internal struggle. What is understood through the Gita is that this internal struggle is universal, and that the despair of a single soul is but the suffering of all sentient life. Yoga consciousness is introduced to liberate, realize, and redress the suffering through practicing the teachings of courage, acceptance, and awakened love as it arises. The Gita sings the song of the gunas, an ancient yogic term to describe the ever-changing nature of nature, and is attributed as elemental movements, which subjugate and separate the development of life from its source. Yoga, as with other traditions, is a word used to qualify and identify this nameless source. The gunas are the energies of consciousness as change. What is the consciousness? Yoga. What is the change? Gunas. They are tripartite. Tamas, which is inactive, Rajas, which is active, and Sattva, which is interactive. Simply put, change is nature, and nature is the gunas. And so the gunas are the qualities of how nature changes. Consequently, the only object that is not subject to change is change itself. The gunas is the changeless, that which we call yoga. So what is the state beyond change? Changelessness. What is the only thing that is changeless? That which is beyond nature. Therefore, this change, according to yogic philosophy, is objectified as the gunas. And so whatever is not subject to change is beyond the power of nature, and so beyond the power of gunas, beyond the power of change. There is a part in each of us that is beyond nature. As such, the sattvic state is able to witness this changelessness. A sattvic state is the realization of I, freed from the predicate, no ownership, nor propriety of any and all identifiable action. This is why sattvic states are often misconstrued and misconstructed as holy rather than as whole. To study yogic philosophy is an experiential practice, the scholar turned mystic, the master student forever seeking and being asked to teach the knowledge of their experience. The understanding of wisdom, not as knowledge, but as the experience of knowledge, is the work of any true practice and practitioner. The love of wisdom is a deep connection between the knower, the unknown, and the path towards the known, where the unknown, the known, and the knower are one. In yogic philosophy, the knower has to experience the unknown in order to transform the known into pure experience. It is not in the aspiration of union, but in the dissolution of aspiration that realization appears. The four paths of yoga. Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom. Karma Yoga, the path of sacrifice. Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. Raja Yoga, the path of practice. Jnana Yoga is the path of wisdom beyond mind. Karma Yoga is the path of sacrifice beyond attachment. Bhakti Yoga is the path of devotion beyond the devotee. Raja Yoga is the path of practice beyond the practitioner. And finally, the pathless path of all yoga, moving beyond the beyond. Gate, Gate, Paragate, the sutra of every seeker tethered to the heart. Knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. Wisdom is experienced through the daily practice of yoga, which naturally leads to the state of meditation. For what we call meditation is not an act of doing, but being, as is all true yoga. The discipline of daily practice is necessary foundation that takes the teachings of form into formless and time into timeless. Yoga is not just stretching the body, but also the mind. The impact of any experience forms an imprint on the mind. Healthy or unhealthy, these imprints create a conditioned response of habitual thoughts and reactive patterns to future experiences. In yoga, this is what is known as a samskara. The mind experiences a samskara as an impression, a negative or positive projection determined by the state of consciousness with which it identifies. Samskaras manifest allegorically as the following. Imagine a line drawn in water. It quickly disappears, and the experience has little to no effect upon the mind. Imagine a line carved in sand. It lingers, and the experience has a temporary effect on the mind. Now imagine a line etched in rock. It lasts, and the experience has a dramatic effect on the mind. And what we call karma is the collective expression of these impressions. It takes immense effort to deviate the energy of a samskara because we first identify that which is self-identifying. Why when I do this, do I do that? Why when I do that, do I do this? Through the practice, there is something in us whispering, I am beyond this and that. There is something more to me than what I am identifying with. A knowledge beyond experience, a state of consciousness that transcends the literal from the allegorical. If we take reincarnation literally, then the whole point of reincarnation is to be free from reincarnation, as is the samskara, to be liberated and realized in this life, not the next. We must learn that instead of reaching and clinging for the next thing, the next life, the next moment, to live fully in this one. As long as we have enough distraction, enough privilege, enough luxury, we will suffer too little or too much to ever make the changes of what we are truly seeking. Until we have seen enough, we will never have enough and never be enough. We love to be entertained, but love is not entertainment. It is our enlightenment. Entertainment is a 13-letter word that has replaced enlightenment. A shrine that became a temple, that became a church, that became a spiritual tourist site. We forgot where we've come from, our parents, and where we are going, our children. We live in illusion. Religion knows this. We live in skepticism. Science knows this. But both faith and philosophy live within the self. Yoga knows this, and without the self, there is nothing to be known. The mind is either selfish or selfless, but for the heart, there is only the self. What we call God is our last imagination. What we call not God is our greatest imagination. The significance of the self that is revealed and never again concealed. The true master teaches how to be a greater master. The real guru encouraged the manifestation of the guru within. Each a living exemplar of what is rather than what is not. Thus, to philosophize yoga is to be lovingly awake to the final sheath unsheathed, the realization of liberation non-separate from the suffering that began the seeking, the third eye radiating the truth of each heart, the self accepting the many realities of ourselves. What end is there to end with but the work of many lifetimes and this life? The realization that is the liberation of a single heart, a self-inquiring question. To know this place is to navigate the infinite space within and around us, to move forward and within at the very same time, and know that it is timeless. To sit, to stand, and then finally to experience the freedom to lay down and know where we are going because we never left, the space between spaces, the death of all life itself. The journey of yoga is to create the journey, not the destination. To create the dharma, not the karma. To create the consciousness, not the self. To create the candle, not the flame. To create the love, not the light. To create the home, not the heart. To create the practice, not the teaching. To create and create and create. The changing consciousness we seek is in seeking ourselves. To know in this life where we are going and where we've been, because we never left and are always arriving. To see things as they are, to love unconditionally, to awaken to now, this is the gift of all meditation, the song gifted by the great singers of silence and non-separation. Science cannot disprove this, religion cannot prove this, only the slim space in between them to know this. The final asana of Shavasana, the ending posture that puts an end to all postures. To know the way is not the same as to experience the way. The wisdom of the way is to become known through the experience and the knowledge of that experience. Let's no longer use words, but see for ourselves in any moment, in every moment, but most importantly, in this moment, the direct experience of the way. The truth of all reality lives inside us all. We are here. We are alive. Know this. Be this. And when forgotten, go back to the practice to remember this. Those who get it, got it. And those who got it, keep getting it. Once you understand it, you no longer have to seek it. So relax. Shavasana is a surrender past fear into pure deathlessness. Surrender. And if you can surrender, then you'll have the will to choose the spaces and places your heart aspires to be without ending. For the gift of being a yogi is to know the gratitude of a breath and to breathe life within each moment, the presence of all that you are into the present of all that you've been given, the final sheath, the last illusion that we have never been separate from the source. The song of songs which echoes the self of all selves, like love, like awakening, like the breath, comes and goes but never leaves, to journey, to practice, to teach, to know the yoga in yoga.